I'm glad you're here. We're talking about commitment, which has a little bit to do with conviction. And we're in a series of sermons of how do we balance some of the stuff that we hear in the Christian life. So we're going to look at this subject of commitment this morning, and let me ask you, what kind of commitment do you have toward God? Psalm 119, 106 says, I've taken an oath and confirmed it, that I will follow your righteous laws. I've taken an oath, I've confirmed it, I am going to follow the Bible, your laws. Let's pray about that. God, today as we join together, may your Spirit come and meet with us. May there be great fellowship between our God and ourselves. May you inspire us and connect our lives to this subject. May we see you in powerful ways and ways that maybe we don't want to see you, and yet you want us to. And so with that little bit of leery edge, what's going to come, what might it ask of me? God, don't allow walls to be built, but allow doors to be opened. And speak to us today, I ask. Amen. There was a cartoon in a newspaper that showed a man ready to leap from the edge of a ledge of a high-rise apartment building. He had a suicide note in one hand and a parachute on his back. And his wife is yelling out the window, "You can never make a commitment, can you, Larry?" And while that's intended to be humorous, it kind of points to a lot of our society and our inability to really make a commitment. People find it hard to commit themselves to marriage these days. And a huge number of people live together without the commitment of marriage. And it's very easy just to walk away. There's nothing there. We're just convenient for the time being. There was a time when we had an Awana program at the end of the year for everybody, when we've had Baccalaureate and Good Friday services where there would be large numbers of people from our church that would come and participate. It's not the same anymore. If we find something better to do, we do it. Whatever's at a higher level of appeal, that's what we give ourselves to. But you look at the subject of sports in our world, and we're on a whole different level. It's a different story. Nobody ever reaches the Olympic Games without a commitment to rigorous training that's required at every level. And you go from one level to the next, and you keep going. And it's rigorous, and there's high expectations. And everybody says it's okay to do that. The Apostle Paul urged Timothy to train himself to be godly. How are you doing in your training yourself? Your training toward godliness. It says to train yourselves to be godly is to pursue holiness, and it requires a whole different level of commitment. As an individual, if we ever hope to progress in our Christian life, this word has to come into play. And one reason we don't see more mature Christians and people acting like mature Christians in various situations, and we don't see the Church of Jesus Christ really grow, is because we've lost sight of this word and what it means: commitment. And I'm not just talking about the word this morning, as you'll see in just a moment, but Paul calls us to be ourselves to be committed to God. Not just to be committed, not to the church, not to Christianity, but to him. In the first 11 chapters of the book of Romans, he does a wonderful job explaining in masterful ways what the gospel is. But then in chapter 12 to the end of that book, he makes it very practical and connects our lives to that message of the gospel. And so I want you to listen to that change as it begins in chapter 12, verse 1 of Romans, that you've all heard before. But it says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers," urge. I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, when you think of all that God has done for you and how he gives to you when you don't deserve it, I urge you with that background to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice to him. It's a holy thing. It's a pleasing thing to God. That's your spiritual act of worship when you do that. And this call to commitment has a different motivation than a commitment, say, to the Olympic athlete. Athlete's commitment is to himself or to a team. And we love those aspects that I can do this, or the aspect of I'm contributing to a little bigger picture to a team, and we're moving in this direction. Paul urges us to be committed to God, and that our bodies are to be offered to him. Now, the people that he's writing to understood a lot about sacrifices because in the Jewish culture and religion, they offered animal sacrifices routinely, regularly. It was very common. They understood it. They didn't have to explain it. But they offered up the life of something else in their behalf. So God is calling us to offer up ourselves, our bodies, for the bigger picture. And it's different from any other commitment. It's not a commitment to a holy lifestyle, although that's good. It's not a commitment to good morals, though that's good. And it's not a commitment to discipleship, though all those things are in Scripture and God calls us to all of those things. Those are good things, but it's not what he is calling us to. The people in my parents' generation followed that. Good people. Generally, they were moral and honest and sober and thrifty, committed to those values, but not necessarily to God. They were great moral people and went to church regularly, but not necessarily committed to God. They were committed to values. Coming out of World War I and II, they saw life very differently. And we can go to Bible studies and discipleship groups and be very active and committed to those, but Paul says, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a commitment to God, which those things can be a part of, but sometimes we just do the things. We're to pursue holiness in order to please him. Why do I want to be holy? Is it to feel good about myself? Sometimes we want to feel good about ourselves. And sometimes because of things that have happened recently in our lives, we don't feel so good about ourselves. Do we avoid it to feel the shame and guilt that follows sometimes when we have a persistent sin that we just keep doing over and over? Far too often, we base our concern with sin on how it makes us feel. Our habits, our besetting sins, they make us feel defeated at times, and we don't like that feeling. We don't like to lose and feel defeated, whether it's a game of checkers or dealing with sin. And it's interesting what we focus on. I heard of a speaker at a retreat for young people that was talking about Christian character during this retreat and talking about those things, as I have mentioned, things we need to put off and things we need to put on if we're going to have Christ-like character. And after presenting this, several people came up to him to talk specifically about a particular sin in their life that they needed to deal with. Nobody ever came and asked, how do I live in a positive way these Christian virtues? And why are we so focused on this issue of sin, but that it makes me feel guilty? And I don't like that feeling that it has, that it brings to me. Those positive characters of Christ that we're to put on and have equal basis, we just don't seem to emphasize as much. They don't have a similar effect. They don't have the same motivation for me to want to change. So our commitment has to be to God and not to something like self-esteem. Sometimes, if I deal with God, I feel better about myself. That's not the purpose. It's about God, not me. It's about who He is, not how I feel, not what's going on at the moment. Frederick Faber, a British writer, wrote this: "When we sin, we're more bothered by the lowering of our self-esteem than we are at grieving God." The point is, we're grieving God when we sin. We're surprised and irritated at our own lack of self-control in unworthy habits. This self-love brings disappointment, and we're not seeing ourselves emerge as beautiful and strong and admirable. Those things aren't the point, to see myself as beautiful and strong and admirable. The point is God. And I'm making Him sad when I sin, and it grieves His heart when I do that. Paul called for commitment in Romans 6:13, and he says, "Don't offer parts of your body to sin as instruments of wickedness, but rather offer yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and offer the parts of your body to Him as instruments of righteousness." All of us are offering our body somehow to God. Are we doing it in wicked ways? We're doing it in righteous ways. And he points out the contrast of what we can offer our bodies to. And he wants us to be aware sometimes we get in the wrong direction of what we offer. And sometimes we can't always control what we look at or what comes out of our mouth. But when we're committed to God, we have a whole lot of help. And we can make some choices, some better choices than what we were making before. And the word that's offered in Romans 12:1, it's this idea of being decisive, a once-for-all kind of commitment. We're to offer our bodies to God in a complete state, a final state, like an Israelite would offer an animal sacrifice. And this is an interesting thought. When they went to offer a sacrifice, it took the life out of it. It was decisive. It was done. You couldn't take the animal back off the altar and throw it in the field and expect it to run around again. The decision was made. It was done. It was over. And our offering as a living sacrifice means that it's ongoing. It's living. I offer it every day that I live. I need to think about that every day that I live. How am I offering myself to God today? It can't be withdrawn. So it becomes a commitment to be continually reaffirmed. Yesterday I did pretty good being a Christian. Sometimes we want to think about ourselves. Maybe I can slack off a little today. Maybe I won't push myself or spend the time that I should today because I've done a pretty good job recently. A commitment to God in pursuing a way of life that is pleasing to Him, not pleasing to me. Again, it's not about me, is it? It's about God. So how am I pleasing Him? All of us are pursuing life in some way. What's your way? I don't know what your way is, but you certainly know. And what's the underlying motivation? On the other side of it, some people can look at our own lives and say, I understand him because he always operates the same way. He always does the same things. And we understand that kind of commitment. But this is a commitment to obedience. And this obedience allows for no exceptions. When I throw that out there, maybe some of you think, how can that be? We can't hold on to secret sins? Our goal is not to sin. That doesn't mean we're going to attain perfection, but we're going to do everything we can to the best of our actions, which means our intention is not to sin willfully. It means consistently making the right choices. There's no point in praying, God help me, when you know you're going to be doing this thing that's wrong. Or you're thinking about it. There's no point in asking for God's help in the face of temptations if we have no commitment to obedience with no exception. David wrote in Psalm 119 that I started out with, I've taken an oath and I've confirmed it. I'm going to follow your righteous laws. He felt so strongly about his commitment to obedience that he took an oath. I'm not just deciding it in my head, but I'm saying it verbally out loud that this is what I'm going to do. And the oath is a solemn calling on God. God, witness what I'm saying and doing here. That I'm sincerely intending to do this thing. It's a declaration, a promise to fulfill a pledge. It's a commitment of the highest level. In other words, it's as strong as you can possibly make it as a human being. Stephen Charnock commented, renew settled and holy resolutions frequently. A soldier could be easily defeated if he has no resolve to fight. Our weaknesses, the strength of our temptations, the indulgence of our spiritual enemies require strong resolutions. Have you told God your resolution today, that today I'm going to be following you to the best of my ability? And I'm going to try to keep sin away from my life as much as I can? You need to do it today, and we need to do it tomorrow. And we need to do it the next day because it's an ongoing reaffirmation. This is my goal. So we have to look at our intentions. God's calling us to respond to this challenge of commitment, to present our bodies as a sacrifice. I have to give up some things. I have to let go of some things. The things that I valued, I don't value in the same way when I'm talking about God. And I have to take this oath of commitment to his laws and be resolved that there's no exceptions to our obedience. And again, most of us think, that's just impossible. How can you ever even present that idea? It's impossible to keep perfectly. I know that. And yet we have to have this goal. We often are reluctant to make a commitment when we know we can't keep that. But the question remains, will you keep that goal? We make commitments to other things. We do it in marriage. Do we do it perfectly? Well, we try. That's our goal. We don't always do it perfectly, but that's our goal, and we keep it out there in front of us. So you remember a couple of weeks ago I was talking about the cruise control mentality where sometimes as Christians we just kind of click it in cruise control and we just kind of go. You know, we've done this for so many years, it's just easy and this is what's expected and this is what I do and blah, blah, blah. Or we can have the race driver mentality that I'm going to win this race. And that's what we're going after here in this idea of commitment. I'm going to win to the end, and so today I've got to make that commitment. And tomorrow I've got to make that commitment. And the next day I've got to make that commitment. It's impossible. Keeping this goal is a high goal, and it's much better than mediocrity. We have to be willing to deal with these refined sins that we've talked about that are small, that we think, they really don't matter a whole lot. Nobody's really paying attention. I can slip this one through, This is what's necessary if we're going to make some progress in our Christian life toward holiness. William Law wrote a book, A Serious Call to a Devout and Holy Life. It's a classic. If you've not read it, read it, get it. And he wrote that to engage in such sins because men have not so much as the intention to please God in all their actions. It's not our intention, really, in every action that we undertake to please God. Well, we'll please God in these because I've learned how to do that and I can do that. But these over here, I just kind of, not really pleasing God, but it's okay, Nobody knows. Is our intention to please God in the big things of life or in the small things as well? Is our intention to please God in all of our actions? Sometimes we look at these people in the Bible and we go, oh man, I'd love to be able to do the same things they did because they're just cool, how it works out and God is faithful and they're such big figures. You have the same chances. You have the same abilities that God gives to you. It's not because you don't intend to. His power is meant for you as well as for them. And you can be a hero in a situation or a God representative or one that makes it known what is right in different situations. You can do that. God has put it within each of us in our own life circumstances to represent him in those ways. The key to our commitment is our intention to please God. If we never make a commitment to obedience with no exception, obedience with no exception, obedience with no exception, then we will continually make exceptions. Well, I'll let myself off the hook here. I'll let myself off the hook here. Oh, was I doing that? Oh. We make some exceptions. Well, I'm 95% doing well, or I'm 75%, or whatever percent you want to put to it. You know your nature, and I know my nature. And we have to make it a goal, a commitment, with no exceptions, or we will make them with exceptions. Because we all do. Always giving ourselves a way out will always give ourselves a way out. That undermines commitment. That doesn't make commitment. It makes a commitment with exceptions. If nothing better comes along or a better temptation comes along, you see, sin exerts increasing power over us. And if it's not resisted on occasion, on every occasion. Romans 6:19 says, just as you used to offer the parts of your body in slavery to impurity and ever-increasing wickedness, so now offer them in slavery to righteousness, leading to holiness. Did you notice the ever-increasing wickedness part? Paul is teaching that sin has this power so that I want to do it more and more. And it becomes easier and easier when I keep making exceptions. I'll let myself off the hook this time. I'll let myself off the hook a week from now. And the next day, and the next day. And it's ever-increasing wickedness. Just as we make a commitment to not sin willfully, so we need to make a commitment to put on the positive virtues of Christian character. And we should make a commitment in the same way. I'm going to try to take on these positive character qualities, just like I try to put off some of these others. Colossians 3:12 says, clothe yourselves. That means put on, surround yourself, button up, zip, make it tight. Clothe yourself with compassion and kindness, humility, gentleness, patience. You know, there are various lists in the Bible of these kind of things that God tells us we're to act like that way. And when you put all of those together, there are 27 positive character qualities that we're to demonstrate to people in our world. How are we working at that list? Are you becoming more compassionate than you were yesterday? How's humbleness, humility going? So what's your intentions? If we want to be Christ-like, we must commit ourselves to putting on these virtues. It's not enough to stop cheating on our income tax. We're to go a little bit farther and to help those that are in need then. It's not good enough just to get over being bitter of those that have wronged us, but we are to actually forgive them and love them. It's not enough that God will enable us to deal with a volatile temper, but we must then act with compassion and kindness instead. Not just stop, but do something different. Put on something new. So people know there's a change here. Wow, what's the change? It's Jesus. Really? Jesus makes a change? Tell me more about that. You see, that can be a conversation starter when you have changed and people see that. What about business people? You know, as you look at business, it's mostly about making money, which is, we all want to make money. But should we be looking at our business as what pleases God best rather than how much money I can make? How can I please God best in my business? How can I please God best in my occupation, in my factory job? How can I please God best? You see, we need to take this into the world in which we live and apply it and commit ourselves to do everything we can to please God, not me. I can apply that as a student in my studying, as a shopper in the store, in the way we compete in athletics, in the way that we drive. Maybe you've been in a situation where there's just enough time to get around this car if I really put it to the floor. And so we start. And then you think, I hope this guy isn't my neighbor. Or somebody that I know will recognize my car, you know? But even if it isn't a neighbor, God knows you're a Christian, and He knows what ways of driving please Him. Our commitment to holiness has to include every area of our life. Put off the old, put on the new. So let's look at some specific commitments. Rather than making a commitment to not sin, you know, that's just so broad. How can you ever say that? I will not sin anymore. What about addressing a specific thing within your life that you know that's your issue? There are some sins that really don't tempt me, but there are others, oh yeah. And I move in those areas, you know? So maybe I need to make a commitment in that area. Identify those areas where we're most vulnerable to sin. And from there, make some specific commitments. And let me give you two examples of people in the Bible that are cooking along through life, wanting to live for God, but recognizing I have an issue here. So we're going to take Job and Daniel for just a moment. Job's commitment was in regard to lustful looks. He's a man. He has eyes. Things appeal to him. Job 31:1 says, I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a girl. God called Job a man who is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. So he's known in those ways. And yet he himself recognizes, I have trouble with my eyes. And I'm going to make a covenant with my eyes that I don't look in those ways. Daniel's commitment was not to eat food that would violate God's dietary laws for the nation of Israel. Daniel had been taken out of Israel as a captive, put into Babylon with a bunch of captives, pulled out as a server to the king and trained in certain ways and told, you're going to eat everything the king eats, very good food, but you need to have the best so you can be healthy and strong enough to serve the king. Well, some of the things that are put before him, God said, I don't want that for my people. It's not good. And so Daniel 1:8 says, but Daniel resolved not to defile himself with royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. He made a commitment not to sin against God in this way. But it required something extra of him, not just to make the commitment, but to go and talk to somebody about it. Because sometimes we get put in that situation where, okay, even though in my mind and heart this is what I want to do, I got to do something about it. And so he had to go talk to the officials that had put him in this position and say, can I be released from that requirement? Even though he knew it could mean his life. Job's temptation came from the sinfulness of his heart. Daniel's temptation comes from the sinfulness of his environment. Temptation comes to us from both ways sometimes. Sometimes just what I want. And sometimes things are just put on me and I didn't ask for them, but here they are. So what am I going to do? We're vulnerable to both kinds. Sometimes there's pressure within, sometimes it's pressure without. An auto dealer several years ago became a Christian, and in his industry at that time, there is no law against turning back the odometers, and everybody did it. It made the car look better. Now the laws have changed and it's different, but at that time, and he became a Christian, he looked at that and thought, that's wrong. God wouldn't want me to do that. But it's going to put me at a huge disadvantage with everybody else in the business. But it's what I have to do. It was a temptation of his environment. He didn't ask to have that be put in that position, but here he is. And what do? Ezekiel, in chapter 14, verse 14, he's talking about different nations, how they were acting in ungodly ways, this nation and that nation and the other nation. And in Ezekiel it says, even if 3 men, Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, they couldn't save the whole country. The thought is every man stands on his own. Because there are 3 or 4 people in this church that might be, we think are really good Christians, it doesn't mean we're all saved. It means everybody stands on their own righteousness. Every person stands for themselves. And God wanted to make the point that even when there are great figures among you, godly people, men and women, it's not going to stop his wrath when sin's involved, because sin is so important. So as we finish this morning, what's our motivation? I realize as I presented this idea of commitment without exception, some of you have just said, ain't going to happen. I mean, there are always small sins, no exceptions. Sure, God gives grace, and that's the purpose of grace. And is God really that strict? We don't like strict, and we don't like rules. But you know, God is strict because he can't compromise his holiness. He's holy. I'm not, but he calls me to that. He knows I can't reach it perfectly, but he expects me to try. That's a goal, that's an aim. And I'm to aim for that today, and I'm to aim that tomorrow, and I'm to aim for that the next day. It's my aim. That's what I move toward. God doesn't have little sins, and God doesn't say, oops, or I'll make an exception for myself today. The goal for us is to be conformed to him, not the other way around. Jesus was completely without sin, and yet he was tempted in every way, just like we are. And keeping our commitment perfectly is our aim, though there is God's mercy. And when we do fail, even though this is our aim, oh man, he still forgives. A soldier in the army, his goal is not to be hit. If he doesn't have that goal, he's just a walking target. But he's trained not to hit, or not to try to get hit. And what he can do to maneuver himself and work his weapons, whatever it is, to protect himself. He'd be dumb if he didn't do that. We would be dumb if we didn't do that in the spiritual life. Let me read again Romans 12:1. Therefore I urge you, in view of God's mercy or grace, offer your bodies it's your sacrifice. It's holy. It's pleasing to God. It's your act of worship to him. It's a holy act. And when we think of God's grace, we can also think of Romans 4:8. Blessed is the man whose sins the Lord will never count against him. That's grace. We can think of all kinds of ways that I don't deserve God's goodness or focus or blessing. And we can just name them and name them and name them, and yet he gives it to us anyway. That's what leads us to commitment. When we think of God's mercy, that leads me to this word of commitment. If God's love wasn't present, then such expectations would be legalistic. His love for us requires our love for him. John Calvin wrote this about our verse. Paul's urging, remember that word? I urge you, brothers. Paul's urging teaches us that men will never worship God with sincerity or be roused to obey him until they properly understand how much they are indebted to his mercy. Paul wants to bind us to God with the sweetness of grace in which our salvation consists. He wants to bind us to his grace. That's again why we have to preach the gospel every day, because my salvation was from grace. And I have to preach the gospel to Kevin today. So, this all-out, unreserved action of commitment, it's not intended to be oppressive, as it can appear. but it's intended to move us to be what God is asking of us. And we preach the gospel to us not only to clear our minds of guilt and of sin, but also we preach the gospel to ourselves out of love and gratitude. Thank you, God. You have done something wonderful for me. So as we finish this morning, let me refer back to our discussion of these areas of temptation. And I'm going to give you some opportunity for silence and for your own personal dealing with God. But I want you to think about, what is it you're doing that's not pleasing to Him? I want you to think about renewing your commitment to Him. I need to be committed today as well as tomorrow and the next day. And in what ways am I putting on those positive character qualities? Am I really thinking about that? And specific commitments. Is this a heart issue with me? Is it an environmental issue that I'm forced into and have to act on? And then think about God's mercy. We don't deserve it, but it's there. So let's just spend a few moments. You and God, shut out other things. However the Spirit of God talks to you.